Welcome to Mental Health Monday, Season 2. We are back with Episode 3. I am Bryon, and that is the lovely Anna. And as we always say at the top of the episode, we are just normal human beings, and normal is subjective. But the idea behind that is we are not professionals, we are not doctors, we don't have written and proven right or wrong theories on anything, but we read a lot and we do our homework, and our many moons on this planet gives us the right to be able to speak on a lot of these things and be able to have our own, you know, things to help you while helping ourselves and give a real talk. And that's why we are the Relatable podcast. And as we get into season 2, we've been having a great time so far. And today we're going to be talking about building healthy romantic relationships, needs, boundaries, and intentional connection, which is very important. And I know I'm excited for this topic. So I'm going to throw it over to the lovely, and I mean lovely, Anna, and she'll get us a little warmed up on what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you, Ryan. About building healthy romantic relationships. And, like Brian was saying, we aren't coming through and saying, this is what we need to do. This is the formula that works. This is coming from, information that we have learned, information that we've picked up, and just experience over the years, too. Sometimes experience and figuring out through doing, finding out what not to do from doing it teaches us a lot more than doing the right thing initially. So, just kind of working through it. But, one of the questions that initially comes up, a broad question is, how do we intentionally build relationships where both people feel safe, respected, supported, and free to grow? And, again, that's really about two people participating in that relationship. Or, in this day and age, it could be multiple people, depending upon what the situation is. But having those relationships where, everybody's coming to the table wanting that goal, feeling safe, respected, supported, and free to grow. Because, we're individually growing over the years, and we're growing and evolving on a day-to-day basis sometimes. So we have to ebb and flow with it. And, some of the initial questions to ask aside from that are like, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase healthy relationship? Where do those ideas come from? Did it come from any like what may or may not have been modeled to us as children, or over the years different examples, and to question what that healthy relationship is that we have that first comes to mind, and have our ideas of what that relationship or a healthy relationship could look like. Has it changed over time? I don't think mine has, but so much, except for really just kind of what it looks like, what the exchange looks like on a regular basis. I always see a healthy relationship of any kind of a partnership, having that teamwork, being able to say, okay, I got this, you got this, and splitting up the different things, and each of us, really coming to the table to see how we can contribute that and working and adjusting through that. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I mean that's a beautiful way to put it. I definitely grew up in the Disney era, is what I call it, and I feel like I had some false ideals of love, and I think I was modeled to think healthy relationship was, the man taking care of the woman and everything will be okay as long as there's love there, and that's where I've failed so many times. But in the movies, that's what they say. The romantic ending is just like the love is enough, and the love trumps all. And that's what I thought of a healthy relationship for probably the longest time, and why I had so many failed relationships in the past, just having a weird, not weird, weird's not the right word, but a different perspective on healthy relationship. And as you put it, like the teamwork thing and all that stuff was something that I learned a lot later in life. And to be able to have a healthy relationship has come from failing and fallen relationships. And then, as I went through this journey, kind of realizing that the things you're saying is beautiful, and that's exactly what you would want is teamwork, and to give responsibility back and forth and kind of have a teamwork attitude, where I think before before really looking into that and really looking into what I thought it was. I was really just trying to do it all. You know what I mean? I think there was a fault to that, and that was definitely one of mine. But healthy relationships, definitely what I was shaped on is just like the happily ever afters, the love trumps whatever situation the romantic comedy has, and over time these really just have you know you learn from mistakes, you learn from experiences, and honestly to be where I'm at right now and to understand this way more than I did even a couple of years ago, I'm in such a better place with relationships even outside of romantic, although I'd say we are talking romantic, but it's just like how we talked in the last episode about this, like boundaries, needs and wants and things like that. And for somebody like me that is anxious and definitely thinks way too hard, the OCD of overthinking and just things like that, I was trying to juggle way too much and try to be more than I could give because I didn't want to put the burden of responsibility on a partner or just, in friendships and things like that. And as I've learned, as we'll talk about more in the episode, is just how to really play for a team rather than just trying to manage everything yourself. So as we get into it, we did talk about quite a bit of things with friendship, family, and work last episode. But today we're going to get a little bit more in the depth because this is a sensitive topic with relationships because I feel like even TV, media, social media, everything portrays relationships to be very healthy and only the one side that you see on movies and social media where it really turned me, growing up in the 90s with kind of a weird view of how that is. So it is it is kind of a great thing to learn, but it took me a long time. So finally at that point where I could kind of see what really when we say healthy, what healthy means, and that's definitely a lot to do with teamwork and being able to share responsibilities and be vulnerable. And just like we need to have in relationships outside of romantic ones, there's definitely a lot more trust and boundaries. Like we said, like there's got to be a lot of moving parts, but they got to be moving together. That's kind of what I've taken away from finding out what healthy means now compared to what I thought healthy was before. Where if I mess up, love trumps all. That is not what happens, and I am living proof of that. So, how do we feel about key takeaways from that?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great point to make is that a lot of it carries over, but our romantic relationships are naturally more intimate than, say, family, friends, work. So they have the opportunity to trigger some things from our past and to trigger things that we didn't realize that we had within us, like any needs that we may not have realized that we have, underlying needs or and needs we didn't express. And that usually comes out in a romantic relationship. And, like with any relationship, there's ebb and flow. And there are times where it's not always 50-50 in any relationship at all times. Sometimes it's I know we mentioned this before, sometimes it's, you have to depend on somebody else a little bit more or vice versa through those different seasons. But having the trust and the having the that's sort of what I'm looking for. Being able to really feel comfortable enough with the other person to have those conversations comfortable, but being, say work. I know we just talked about work, but like work related, if I continuously overstep my own boundaries as far as doing more and more work in my spare time, then I'm not going to be able to sustain that in the long run. And so really creating something that is sustainable if you want to continue on with that relationship. But now we're going to apply it to romantic relationships. And, they're not defined as the absence of conflict or differences, but by two people continuously and intentionally choosing to understand, be curious, support, repair, and grow alongside one another.
Yeah, I think healthy is a beautiful word to use, although can be misconstrued in different ways. But definitely, just to go off of what you just said, I think it is really important to understand that there will be conflict, there will be ups and downs, but the real solid and what we would call healthy relationships kind of last through things like that because they have built these foundations. And what a healthy foundation looks like for a relationship is just like mutual respect, understanding that the person across from you or next to you is somebody that respects you. And there's plenty of ways to show that. There's the trust, which comes from respect. And, like when things have a fallout or go downhill, you have the trust and the respect to be able to know that you'll be able to get back to that, to be able to have the conversation. If you can't trust that you'll have a conversation over stuff, you don't really have a healthy and stable foundation. So, emotional safety goes right along with that. Curiosity, because, like, with me, myself, I was just trying to, tunnel vision and just be everything for everybody, including my romantic partners, and not being curious and not holding accountability for myself or them because I was trying to control it all. Me and my control. It's the worst, but I've learned to deal with it and be able to be better about it. But having the accountability instead of just looking for the issues and problems, having the flexibility to be able to have issues and problems and be able to come back to things. And, like we say a lot, take the time to think about things and have a real conversation because that's healthy instead of just reacting, blowing up, and having our nervous system kind of do its thing when we have time to know we're going to probably freak out, then we should probably take the time to do that instead of freak out. So having that trust and mutual respect has definitely come into that. And then just shared responsibility, like you said, giving back and forth. You guys, one day you might be doing 70 and they're doing 30. Some days it might be 10-90. Other days it's 50-50. It's all about balance and being able to support each other and share some of the responsibility so you're not fully in charge. Like I was just saying how much I was putting on my own plate was stressing me out all the time, but I couldn't let the, you know, accountability and vulnerability to be there. So just supporting each other. And then definitely one thing that I really find important is space for individuality. Let your spouses have their time, let them have their things they like to do, their hobbies and things like that. I think it's very important. It's something that I've learned in my time with relationships that it definitely builds a better, healthier relationship when both people can enjoy their things without having to feel guilty or, that sense of we need to be together all the time type of thing and being an anxious attachment. It was probably a lot to do with what I had been offering or feeling like should be the normal, as we talked the Disney era of just thinking love is everything. So shared values and teamwork is also just great because as much as opposites attract, you need to have some kind of values that you see eye to eye on. I don't think that you need to do every value has to be eye to eye, but I think it's got to be more than not. I think is the best mix so that you can have conversations and good deep conversations about certain things while discussing things that maybe you don't see eye to eye on and having that cool and great conversation where you have the trust and respect to be able to have conversations that normally maybe would be hard to have if you didn't have that kind of relationship with the person that you're having that with. So teamwork, you touched on it. It's you really do have to have somebody that is on your team, and that's one thing that it's not a one person does everything type of situation. Healthy relationships are teamwork, and it takes two to tango, as they say. So
Yeah, yeah, and, just looking at them on a surface level, each of these foundations, it's easy to say, "Oh, yeah, I would respect, my partner, and I would want to have shared responsibility," or just whatever, but when you look a little bit further into it, like, in applying through our own lens and our own experiences, I know one thing that I've had to check myself on is sometimes, I haven't always been the most clear as far as some of the things that I've communicated. Whereas I may have tried to communicate, hey, this is what I need. Or sometimes I just didn't. And I'm like, well, they should know that, that's just, it's respectful. But then I'm like, well, I have to think about it. Did I actually say, this is what I want? This is what I need. This is what I value? To make it crystal clear, hey, this is the expectation that I have of a partner. Are you going to meet me in it? And sometimes it hasn't. I haven't brought that to the table, and so not only am I, like, say, for example, not doing that, that's actually showing disrespect to the other party because it's not giving them a fair chance to really bring to really know what's going on in my life and to really understand me better and to create that intimacy of knowing, hey, this is what I need, this is what I who I am and what I value, and not disclosing that information is actually disrespect. So yeah, We have to check ourselves regularly on these different foundations and sometimes dig a little deeper to really see where can we improve.
Yeah, it's hard to really understand that unless you've felt that or dealt with that. I think that's why this subject in general is just a little, a little more sensitive, a little bit more touch and go, rather than the family work and friends discussion we had last week. It's hard because I think one thing that I was always doing was not really letting what I wasn't being vulnerable enough and I wasn't listening enough to know what was being said to me and what I wasn't saying to them, and that's definitely part of the whole, trying to communicate. I mean, that's what we've shared since season 1 and a lot in season 2 is communication's so big, and that's really how I found healthy relationships is to be able to talk about things that were normally hard to do, and for me to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, this is what's going on with me, and I need to tell you so I'm not thinking it, and then I'm not ruining my own time by downward spiraling because I'm not putting it as a team effort where I can bounce something off of you and then you can bounce it right back. And then, hey, maybe even just discussing it is a need that I have that I didn't know, and where I found a lot of that is just like being vulnerable emotionally, and just letting my partner in on like, hey, like I'm stressing on money. I'm stressing on this. I just really want this to go well. And then that way you're feeling seen because they're hearing you. And a lot of things minimize compared to the big stress that they have when they just go on in your head and not through communication, which I've really drilled at home this season is just like talking out loud and talking to the person that you have this trust and real connection with that you value that connection. You are able to have conversations that you can be vulnerable because it is important because you need the emotional support and they can reassure you and you're going to hear their reassurance more than anybody else's. I think that's one of the biggest things with a relationship situation that we're talking about here is just that you really can be a lot more things that you could be with other people because these people see you at your best and your worst and most of the time more than other people and they get to hear you and see you and be able to say what they need to say too and that's where that trust and vulnerability comes in because there's going to be a lot of different kinds of understanding each other when it comes to an actual romantic relationship. And I think there is different love languages for people, and that's definitely something you find out while being vulnerable. You know what I mean? So that is just one big thing that I've learned is just to listen, 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 listen. And I know that is not a popular thing to do, or people would say it's very popular to do, but listening, I was always trying to say, I think is the best way to put it, always trying to put what I need out there, but I don't think I was ever listening to a point where I could hear the other person saying what they needed because I was too distracted on what I wasn't getting, but I also wasn't asking for it. So that's like a really big communication thing. And really, when you can get to your emotions and have that feeling of being seen, you can be more vulnerable. And that's what I've learned. And that's where I could have such a better time in romantic relationships than I did before, where I was very closed off and just trying to, be a CEO and streamline everything. And that was not the way that got me anywhere with anybody. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point to make. It's like that trust is built over time. It's built bit by bit, and it's not built by proximity and just time together. It's built by disclosing things about ourselves and disclosing, how we're feeling at a moment, what we're dealing with, disclosing things that are sensitive, being vulnerable to share those bits of information bit by bit and having the other party receive it well. If I disclose something and it is not received too well or just, kind of brushed over or ignored, that's telling me something. Now, the other person may not mean to be doing that. It may just be they're distracted, they've got other things on their mind and they just may miss it and aren't really actively listening. But it also, over time you could, and these are the things that you can tell and also have conversations about. It's like, okay, or are they actively dismissing it? That's a more serious aspect there. And so, yeah, the trust is built by really sharing bits of information with one another and building that building upon that vulnerability to be able to share more and more intimate things. And that's what brings us closer to one another and asking questions without being prying, you know? Sometimes, like you're saying, people aren't necessarily just going to open right up and share all the different details of their lives and how they're feeling, what they're experiencing. It could take it takes a lot of time and patience. And some people also do keep things on pretty surface level. And if that's your MO, then that's okay. But to build a real, I guess, honest and deep, intimate relationship, we really need to start creating that information, kind of like the good kind of breadcrumbing. I'm going to give you a breadcrumb of information. I'm going to give you another piece and another piece to just kind of give you clues about me and give you little bits of information about me and staying curious about the other person too.
I think it's very important to know that. I think just like all of this mental health thing in general is not an overnight thing. I think it's more about little by little we let each other in, and then it becomes more safe to feel like the big things don't feel like big things, right? Like there's that vulnerability that we build through little nuggets of information and how we're feeling, and just in hopes that they pick up on these things, just like we talked about in the last episode of just you know we build relationships by, kind of building it up bigger and bigger. And I think, a healthy romantic relationship is that where it builds up, just a little bit more as we go through it, because then we can be talking about big things and they don't feel big, and I think that's really where we get with that because we have to have all these different types of, understandings within a romantic relationship. We have emotional, physical, definitely more physical doesn't have to mean sex. I mean, that's, what you think is physical relationship, but that's not all what we're talking about here. And just individual, making sure that you're growing as a person. And then your relational is a lot of just communication. So, we find out through these little nuggets of like, hey, I like when you're next to me and I hold your hand. That's like showing affection. There's physical touch and you feel it and you grow on that. And then just, there is the intimacy side, but it's just like I feel like any relationship, you kind of find out more as it builds together. So I think with all these things that we're talking about here, it's built over time, but you have to be in a place where you can trust that. I think that's a big part of this as well, is like you got to let your heart be open to building something rather than getting to step 10 before you get to step 3. And I think that is where I've failed many times in relationships as well, just being like, well, the intimacy has to be perfect or it's not good. That I can't trust this person. And I think that's where I've gotten wrong and where I've seen other relationships get wrong is because we try to jump to the steps that are way further. But when you build something with time and increments, just like how we try to build ourselves up to be a better person so that we can be better to other people, is the same way with a relationship. I think it's really got to be more based on building something. And when you find somebody to do that with, you're going to feel a lot more safe in all these different areas to be able to be your own person within the relationship, having the trust to be able to talk to somebody. And then the physical is always better because you're on the same page. And I understand, as a human, that's what we're told and kind of see, but there's definitely so much benefit on building something rather than just expecting to have it. And that's definitely been a downfall that I've had. Feel about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And not every relationship is the same. Even if, like, you're, say, I'm the common denominator, every relationship that I have with somebody else it can be completely different. And so the dynamic, not only how I show up, but how the other person shows up, that dynamic together, it looks a little different. In one relationship, I may feel that sharing finances is, at least, for a partially is ideal, whereas in another one, maybe not as much. Going into previous marriages is that, and I learned it the hard way, unfortunately, is, you kind of want to know how the other person operates on a day-to-day basis before you go into a marriage. You want to get an idea about how that looks like. How do they take care of themselves? You know, kids too, they throw a big wrench in relationships, and that involves having those conversations, building that trust. And again, some of these things come up suddenly, and you're like, oh gosh, all right, we gotta figure this out. But sometimes that's a very beautiful thing, and you work through it, trial and error. It's not like you have to have it figured out immediately, or you have to have it figured out like all initially, yeah, that's ideal is if you have these conversations initially, but, things may change over time. We grow and we change, and our needs may change. You know, uh, God forbid that something happens to one of us and, we incapacitated for any length of time, and that requires caregiving. And what's that going to look like? You know? So our different needs in the relationship and our own individual needs change over time. But like you're saying, communicating them and staying curious is what helps.
Yeah, curiosity did not kill the cat in this situation for sure. What I've learned is curiosity has helped things grow. Definitely agree with everything you're saying. I think a good important thing that I want to say off of what you said is, we say it a lot, but we change often and people do change often. And us as people, we evolve and things change and all this other stuff. That's why you have to leave your heart open and, it is a hard thing because we've all been shaped by previous relationships and things have gone wrong. And that's, how our life kind of goes. We kind of try to stay out of that trouble and stay out of that. And so once we get our heart broken, which I know I have plenty of times, is hard to let that happen again. So you get a little bit more guarded. So as we get through and as I say, we're trying to build these relationships with people. We have to understand that we have to be willing and in a place to be able to take on a relationship because there is always that chance. And it's the gamble of life, I would say. Love is the gamble of life because we have to let ourselves be open to it, but we also have to know that it could be not good for us, but we learn those things. And just like as people evolve and change over time, I think it's really important to be open to that. And I think communication. I know I keep saying it. I'm not trying to drill the same thing home, but I mean, I feel like where I've gotten out of whack a lot of times in relationships is not having that trusted conversation where I can say these things are changing or how I feel is different now. And, that's where the trust, respect, and mutual understanding really comes into play where we have to be able to understand that we can have those difficult conversations or at least say like, hey, like I'm not feeling this. And I'm not saying not feeling the relationship, but like about a certain thing or like I'd like something to change so that I could be better. There's gotta be have those conversations, and that's the only way you have that is to be open and have that trust with somebody else and be able to build that trust because that doesn't just happen. I mean, even friendships, you don't just tell them your deepest, darkest secrets on the first day, unless you're just really open, you know what I mean? I understand that people are, so I'm not totally discrediting that, but I think it's important for you to know that you have to be open to whatever is gonna happen, and, there's reason to get back on that board, like surfboard. There's reason to get back on that board, and you have to understand that, nothing in this life is guaranteed, and there's nothing that is gonna go right always. But, you find out by doing, right? We find out by failing, and how many times I've failed is why I've learned so much. And, there isn't a part of me that wants to Scrooge McDuck or whatever it is where I go back and see all the past things of myself and change how I am. I think it's more or less just like, I've learned so much, but I'm in such a better spot now. And unfortunately, but fortunately, it all happens through, experiences and other things. And it's hard not to be jaded. And it's hard not to be worried that you're going to open up too much just to be shut back down. And that's where the communication comes in really heavily. And it's just, that push and pull is real, and being able to be open to it is real, and people do change, and we need to give grace. We love that word too. We gotta give grace and understand that when we build a relationship, we can have that feeling of, like, things might change, but we can evolve with it. You gotta find the right pairing to be able to say, "Hey, whatever it is, we'll get through it." You said it perfectly with like, if somebody goes down with sickness or something happens, then you have to become a different role than you're used to. This is probably the most relationship, we talked about family, work, and friends before. This is a different ball game, and that really shows up and is harder. That's why we're trying to take, a really good look at this one as with romantic relationships, because I think some of these things that you can kind of push back from in those other ways with other relationships and kind of give more space. the romantic relationships don't have as much, like, there's got to be more rubber band, there's got to be more space, but being able to know that rubber band's going to contract back, and then when you come back with that rubber band, you have a relationship strong enough that you built to be there to have all these headbutting moments, but knowing that like we're going to get back to a space rather than being able to back off and say this isn't serving me. You have to work on it in a different way than on these other relationships.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking of while you're saying that is like, before we get into a relationship, we kind of have to know where we are ourselves. And we may not know exactly where we're at, but we can have an idea, a litmus test of, okay, do I have the capacity to have a relationship of sorts? Not necessarily end all be all, but like, do I have the time, the energy to spend some more of my time with somebody else versus, oh, I'm completely stressed out. I have all these other things going on, and I have absolutely no capacity for anybody else because I don't even have capacity for myself. And that's all just like learning ourselves, engaging that to see. And I don't think anybody's really ready for a relationship, honestly. Yeah, there's some things that are indicators that we may not necessarily be ready. And, like as if we went through some emotional distress, even fairly recently, and we're still working through that. That may, you may want to take some time with that to work through it. But, I don't think anybody's really ready. Just like they say, and I don't know personally, but they say, are you ready to have kids? I don't think anybody's really ready to assess the responsibility that you have there. God bless parents that are very active in their kids' lives too. But it's one of those things, okay, yeah, I could probably work through it. And like you're saying, being open, being keeping our hearts open if you do have a connection and seeing and assessing with that person, hey, do is this something that I can work with? Do they also see it as something they could work with? Is this something that we could possibly, build on? We may not necessarily know where it's going, but we can see and having those conversations up front because I think one of the things that is a big issue today is that people don't necessarily know where they're at or they do, and then they start to talk to somebody and create a relationship only to, say, hey, I'm actually not ready for a relationship, but I want the situation. It's like, no, that's doing the other person a disservice. And it's doing yourself a disservice in the long run because, when we do that, we're honestly really seeking some form of intimacy, but you're only getting a little bit of the cake there. I mean, no, we deserve the whole piece. We deserve the best. And isn't it better to really give that to somebody and to have that ourselves? It's, kind of know where we're at and being able to say, yeah, let's try it. Let's see what we can do here. Let's see what we can build. And in least then you have the conversation and you agree upon it. And if things don't work out, then they don't work out. But at least then you're on the same page.
Yeah, I think exactly what you were saying was that quote, and I know I'm going to butcher it, but it feels like to live a life and to have loved is a better life to live than a life without love, right?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's something along those lines. I don't think it's Bill Shakespeare, but it's something along those lines of something. But yeah, I think it's important on what you said to, it's being vulnerable. That's a real big thing. I think vulnerable means different things at different times, but being vulnerable and open enough to explore things, you know what I mean? And I think what we'll get into now is just like relationships do trigger, a lot of things. And I think that's where people find themselves maybe dipping their toes in because of, abandonment, rejection, and not feeling enough, and just a lot of the things that come with relationships being triggering. Sometimes when people give you a lot of attention when you're not used to having that, or that's not how your past relationships were, or it was a downfall of a relationship, there's triggers there. So, as we always do, we want to do that homework. And if we're the ones experiencing these things of like discomfort or being like, why is this coming up right now? Like, why do I feel this way about this person? Or like, why do I feel this way about my past? Why is it triggering me to feel this way? Like, is this person not for me because it's triggering me for reasons of past time and like bad experiences I've had? I feel like that's a lot of today's world is we're all holding on to something. You know what I mean? And when we're talking mental health, we need to do the homework. We need to find out why we're feeling these things. And that's when you have to find that relationship where you can have the space to take the time to have your own space to find these things out and not necessarily have to ask the other person why you feel this way. Start doing the homework, like we say, is finding out why we're feeling this way. Why would I feel this way? Why am I letting something that happened to me before really deny me something that I can have now? You know, it's a really tough situation, and I'm not saying any of this is easy, but to build like a healthy romantic relationship, you really have to be open to all aspects of having your own individual time, you know, really putting yourself out there because you don't want to lose yourself in a relationship. I know I've done that a million times. I've seen people around me do it. It's never a good ending, right? Like I feel like anytime I get that same story from somebody around me, you know, like, well, I just kind of stopped doing everything I was doing and I just became totally involved. Whatever they liked, I liked, and whatever they did, like I made myself available to do it. I don't think I've heard any or seen any good movies that ends well. You know what I mean? I think finding out why we need these things is part of a healthy relationship. I think finding out these reasons to feel this way and what drives us to act certain ways definitely will help us. And it doesn't mean we can't build a relationship and a healthy, you know, intimate relationship with somebody while building ourselves up. I think that's the beautiful thing as some people show us our true colors and we see their true colors. And that's when we can start to, you know, paint that picture or that story, write that story, whatever you need to do to kind of see what's happening in real time to be able to kind of, you know, do the homework, take the time to really see because we've all had rejection, we've all had abandonment, we've all been through things. And as I've been jaded before, the only time that I've been able to get out of my own way is to realize that, you know, whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. And again, to live and love is more better than to not love at all. So there's reasons to get hurt. And I say that jokingly in the sense of like there's reasons to put yourself out there because we're never gonna know if we don't know because we don't try. And that's what this is about. Mental health is about trying and putting yourself forward and trying to like, you know, explore options. And if it doesn't serve you, you can get out of it before you get too deep. Because I think if you're doing the homework while dealing with any intimate relationship, you know, you don't have to be doing homework while you're hanging out with the person, but just kind of thinking on things. I think that's really important to be able to take the time to think about what's going on so that you can see yourself further along and see if this person changes in some sort of way or gets sick and can I see myself with this person and having to deal with this person more or you know, I think that's what you find out by letting your heart be open to the idea of building something or giving time to something because good things happen over time. And just like our mental health, it gets better over time in little increments. Just like the little nuggets that you said before, as you share back and forth, you find out more and more, and it builds up your core to be bigger than it was before. So then you become more comfortable. And that's kind of where sometimes you can walk away from something that you've built because you've become more comfortable. You know what I mean? Rather than just being like dodging each other because you're not building these things that we need to have within a healthy relationship, like boundaries.
Triggers as far as, recent experiences, things that I've had to go through. Triggers are really just pieces of information. They're information for us to be able to take back and to question ourselves and question the experience at the moment and to, question the other person in the relationship. And it can be any combination of those different things or just one thing in particular. And to see, okay, in that moment, say for example, I didn't attend an event because I had other stuff going on and I was exhausted. But, my partner went ahead and went to hang out with friends. And, maybe I was triggered, and this has happened before. I could be a little triggered because I didn't hear anything from them, just to kind of like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm okay. And I'm like, "You okay? Is everything all right?" And I had to take that information back. And yeah, not saying necessarily, oh, yes, message me throughout your entire time, but, just to check in. Hey, I'm okay. I'm still here. It's getting late, but I'm still here. I'm fine. That just makes it so that I don't worry, especially if you're drinking alcoholic beverages. But to but that is a trigger for me, and I had to take that information back and say, okay, is this a him thing? Is it for me based on my past experiences? Is it a combination of the two? And how can I really adjust this moving forward? Is there a conversation that needs to be had? Is there something that I need to do within my own work and expectations? But I know one thing is that having conversations about it too, if it is involving the other person, that gives them the opportunity to make a change and gives us the opportunity to make a change as well too. It's because both parties are playing a factor in that. So yeah, the triggers are really just bits of information, and that for me is that comes from the fear of abandonment as one of the triggers. Rejection. My astrologer said that rejection is the best protection because, and that can be with anything, not just relationships, because it may have protected us from an opportunity that wasn't really right for us at that time or even in general. Yeah, it looked great at first, but that job was really going to stress us out. So being rejected from that stressful job, in the long run, it protected us and gave us the opportunity for something that is more suitable for us at that time. And these are different examples of triggers. Not feeling like we're enough, feeling of engulfment, feeling fear of losing independence. You know, a lot of times we can see, oh gosh, a relationship involves so much and involves all this, but you're kind of putting the cart before the horse there. At the beginning, it doesn't necessarily. And that's where having a conversation is too. It's like, okay, are you wanting to participate with me and seeing where this goes? Yes or no? And what does your life look like right now? How much, like it's being and assessing and getting an idea of like, I have a lot going on in life right now, but I will make sure to spend, like one day a week and we can hang out, we can have go on a date, whatever. But really having that fear of losing our independence, it's really taking that idea of a relationship and blowing it up when it hasn't even gotten to that proportion. So bit by bit, that's when we can see and we can get through and work through these fears with the right participating party, someone who's willing to come to the table and be there with us.
Yeah, I think that speaks on to what I was talking about earlier of just, we're trying to rush things, get too far along to see if we can make this work in 6 months to a year from now. Are you gonna be here in 6 months? Are you gonna be here to a year? And that's not a knock on anybody or anything really. It's just like we being vulnerable is tough. We've talked about it a lot, and just to know that there's the chance of failure or they're not the person even though you're investing your time or maybe you're infatuated with them, all those types of situations that come with an intimate relationship is, it's tough. It's really tough. I think from what you're saying, the biggest thing that I've been able to be better about is communication. We've talked about it, but like voicing those things, like you were saying, like I just need a little bit of communication while you're out is something that when you're in a relationship that you have feel comfortable saying those things, and that's not easy. I think that's built over time, but once you start saying these things, needs, boundaries, and all these other things, they don't seem like they're big deals because you're able to have these conversations in healthy relationships. I think it gets overlooked a lot. I think we see what we see. We have tunnel vision a lot when we have relationships, and it's harder to see some of the smallest things are big things. And I think what I mean by that is like my communication has grown exponentially on with a partner to be like, hey, like instead of holding it in or bottling it, and like you said, like, is this me? Is this a me thing? Like, what's going on here? You kind of just voice what's going on. Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I don't need all your time, but I just need to know, like, hey, when you're out and about, like this is what would make me comfortable, and I don't have to go through my own mental breakdowns and have my own thoughts. I just need a little bit, and that's what I need. And if you can't do that, then it's a topic we have to discuss in further detail. But just putting it out there is important. So that communication and just having the balance to be able to do things like that has been a downfall of mine forever. Until really putting in work to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable here, and I'm going to say like this might not make me sound cool or comfortable in my own skin, but like if you're gonna be out and about, like I just need to hear a little bit of communication here and there. I don't need your time always, but I just need more right now, and this is what I need to feel comfortable. And it goes a long way. And when you find the right people to hear you, they're able to communicate back like, "Hey, I can't do that," or "Hey, okay, I hear you, and I'm gonna do better." Like it really comes down to being able to be clear on your message to the other person and be able to have that communication, because I feel like what I've done wrong so many times is just, this is what I need. Just like that overbearing conversation where I'm not listening to what they need as well. So to be able to be in a relationship, to have those small talks about things that are going to make us feel more safe is a huge deal. And I think that's a big thing on healthy relationships, is just being able to say the big things, say the small things, and they kind of hold the same weight. And I think that's a goal that we all want to achieve, is whatever we're talking about isn't going to feel like a 10,000-pound weight on us when we say them. And I know from experience in what relationships I've been in, I've not wanted to have even that conversation we just had. Like, hey, I just need some of your time. When you're not here, just like send me a text. Just say, hey, what up? Like I just need that so I don't spiral and go crazy. Like, but that's where you find these like healthy boundaries and like really trust. I mean, these things aren't easy. And I'm telling you this from experience, because, you don't want to put your partner in a what you would feel is an uncomfortable situation by being vulnerable, because then you're putting them on the spot to feel like they have to take more responsibility. But I'm here to say that if you're in the right relationship, or one that is going to be mutual and respecting, they will hear you. They will be able to at least hear you. Even if they do what I used to do and be like, yeah, I would just really like for you to text me at any time that you're not with me. I just really need some of your time. So just do that. Like, you can't be like that. You have to hear what they're saying as well, because maybe you can hear what they need as well, and then that's where we compromise and have a healthy relationship where we can hear both ways. You can talk and then be quiet. That's my hardest thing, as you can tell. Talk and then be quiet. That was never my strong suit. It's talk, get my point across, make sure that I am saying what I mean, and not, but that was me not listening to what they're saying. I'm just trying to get my point across and be right and do all these things. And that's where the communication comes in, where it's been hard, people. It's hard to listen, as much as it seems like an easy thing to do. You gotta listen, because then you'll hear things you didn't hear before, and that like blew my mind. You know what I mean? I was able to shut the f up and listen to the person across from me and really hear what they're saying, and then go, shit, I was asking for a lot. I wasn't even hearing 2 words they said to come back at that. I was just trying to be like, "I'm right. I'm right. I'm right." And it's just like, that's the ideal not healthy relationship that I didn't investigate that until I really had failed too many times, you know what I mean? So it really does take experience with different people and different relationships to kinda find what your boundaries are, find where the middle ground is, per se, of who you're with. You can find these things and grow with, as we say, these little nuggets go back and forth and we build something bigger. And that's where this can be. You can have a beautiful, healthy relationship to a point where, if you're both having good communication and kind of building it off of that, I feel like is something that I missed out on a lot. And then to say that I've had any good relationships in the past 3, 4 years is because of the work I've done to be able to listen and realize my homework of, why am I like this? Why am I still jaded? Why am I feeling these ways? So I don't
Yeah.
know if you have anything to say to that.
Yeah. And I know you touched on it before, is different interactions that we have with people outside of any romantic relationship. That is practice. That is practice, and it's information. It can give us information about ourselves and about how other people operate. Like, my taking the concerning effort to listen actively, which it's really hard if you're neurospicy. You try, and sometimes you're like hyper focused on the conversation. Sometimes it's like, oh, my brain is starting to wander, and then I just missed everything the person just said, and it that is hard. But so making the effort to actively listen to what somebody's saying and using that information and really categorizing it in our brains and being able to use that for future reference. Hey, they gave me information about themselves, even though they didn't say it in the format that says, here's some information about me. Yeah. So it's those little things that somebody may be trying to express a need, but may not be as clear coming out with it, that expression of it, as we may immediately register. The same thing with a boundary. So a boundary helps to protect the need. And, knowing that and knowing where their boundaries are, if they're trying to communicate that, that helps us to not overstep them and being able to share that as well. And also not overstepping our own boundaries. But yeah, all those different conversations that we have with others in general are essentially practice for a more intimate relationship. Knowing and learning about how, say, in my last corporate job, how my boss operated. That when he said this is really what he meant. He wasn't trying to be crass. He wasn't trying to be cold, but it comes across that way. I learned that from our conversations and from observing him that, he was trying to assist. Did it make it any easier to receive at times? No, but I had to train my brain to say, okay, this is what typically is going to happen and this is what it means and I shouldn't take offense to it. And because of that, those triggers that I had initially with him became fewer and fewer. And I was able to actually meet him in the middle and have more constructive conversations and have a better overall relationship with him. Same with a romantic relationship. Somebody's going to trigger me by what they may do or say or whatever. And, that's bits of information. If somebody is continuously not listening to me, actively not listening, or if they receive the information and say, yeah, I'm going to, I can work on that, but then they don't make the effort to actually do that, that's information to me saying, okay, how many, what is my boundary here? What is my limit? As to what I can receive. I can communicate, I can have conversations, we can see, okay, how can we work through this? But if there is no actual effort on the other party, then, no, okay, well, when do I need to walk away and when, you know, or else we're doing ourselves a disservice. And honestly, probably the other person as well for still being attached in any capacity. So yeah, having those different conversations really help. And going back to, like, needs and boundaries, some examples of those, like, in a romantic relationship could be as simple as, I need a little alone time daily to reset my mind and be the most effective. So, for instance, if you have a job, a 9 to 5, come home, you need like a buffer of time. Saying I need that buffer of time, of quiet time to myself, kind of reset and then, have a conversation. And, a boundary be communicating that need and taking the time to step away and both of us honoring that need. Because really healthy boundaries are meant to protect our well-being while still respecting both parties, both ourselves and others. If they use boundaries to control or isolate or punish a partner, like for example, dictating who they can and can't see, using it to have the silent treatment, that's not creating safety and creating connection there. That's creating control. That is trying to control the other person because that's not both of you coming together and saying, hey, this is what I need. This is what is healthy in the relationship. That's saying, you can't do this. You can't do that. That's having a parent.
Yeah, I think you said it quite well right there. I just feel like I had the tendency to blow things up to get attention or feel like I'm not on the same page with them. So conflict and, setting some weird boundaries or having some sort of way towards a person, I'm a person of control. I want to know what's going to happen. I want to, gauge what's going to happen and all these other things. And then really when I went and did some homework and really like worked on myself to understand that I can't control everything and that it really gets in my way a lot is where I've been able to have healthier relationships across the board is because, you know, kind of gone on to the be here now of it of just understanding that whatever is going to happen is going to happen. So these things that maybe you're holding on to because of past relationships or anything else that you're feeling, there's a reason for it. You got to really dive into that and understand that, to be in a healthy relationship means you have to be open to these things and not have to know everything or be in control of everything all the time. And, I'm speaking for myself when I say that, but I know how important it was to me to understand, we all need space and we all need our own things. And there's so much quality to that I don't think gets enough, attention when we talk about healthy relationships. I think having friends, being able to talk to family, to play video games if you need to, do household chores, and then just knowing that you can voice those things and do those things so you have healthy boundaries within your relationship to say, hey, like to be good to you and to be good to myself and not lose myself or lose this relationship, I'm going to have to do certain things, and that's not like a I'm putting my foot down and I need to hang out with my friends this many times or this. It's just to let the other person know like this is important to me so that, we always try to show up as the best ourselves for other people, but also ultimately ourselves so that we can have connections that are meaningful and worthwhile in the sense of if we show up the best we can be for ourselves, we can show up the best in a relationship. And I think I've failed at that many a times, not realizing that I needed to be better myself. I could just make it work, right? Love will outlast everything, right? Like my Disney movies taught me, all that kind of stuff has really failed me a lot. And as we keep diving into this topic, I feel like we should probably break it up into a part two discussion because as we normally do, we've gotten into a lot of topics here, but we still have topics to go. But I feel like we can break it up because we said a lot of great things so far. And I look forward to, talking more because I think as we've gotten into the episode, we've kind of realized, or at least I have, I'm speaking for myself here, is like how deep it really goes. Because we were talking on family, work, and friendships last episode, and that was easier to kind of touch on, but there's so many nuances, and I think it's important. I think this is an important topic that we can split this up into two episodes. So if you want to kind of give everybody a little briefing of what we got left of to talk about building some healthy, intimate relationships.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And great suggestion, Brian, because, and again, we are going to be covering doing a deep dive into this information right now. We can really take this, like you said, break it apart into the next one and then do a deep dive on different particular areas. Relationships aren't linear. We grow and we change on curves. That's what life is. We ride the wave. So yeah,
Yeah,
upcoming, yeah, we're gonna, talk a little bit more about, boundaries and needs, like healthy boundaries and needs, what kinds that there are, interdependent on the other party, with the other party, communication, for connection, conflict, which we're gonna have our own specific episode on as well for conflict and repair, but just touching on that in the next episode. And, that repair, growth, internal intentional connection is what we have coming up here.
I know we've talked a little bit about conflict and repair and growth and intentional connections. It's probably something I'd like to dive deeper into. And from my experiences and everything else of having a lot of not healthy relationships to know what that looks like, to finally being in a place where I can have some healthy ones, to know what repair actually is. That's crazy to think about. 10 years ago, me was not repairing and might have been freeze, fawn, all the good things that we do. So it'll be a good time to talk about that. But it's been a lovely time talking to you today on this healthy relationship. I can't wait to get into it on the next episode of Mental Health Monday. So I've been Brian, and that is the lovely Anna. And you all, please take care of yourself.
I take